Welcome back to Discovering Nutrition with Cronometer. I'm your host and community marketing manager, Eliisa, and today I'm thrilled to sit down again with Andres Ayesta. This episode dives into a bold 60-day self-experiment, comparing a whole foods diet and a carnivore diet. Andres doesn't just talk theory, he put it to the test, tracking body changes, performance, appetite, and how each approach actually felt in real life. We get into what surprised him the most, what was harder than expected, and how these two very different ways of eating played out day to day, including training, competition, and life outside the gym. This is one of my favorite conversations I've had yet, and I think that you'll love it too. As always, this podcast is for general purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including giving medical advice. The use of information from this podcast is at the user's own risk and is not to be substituted for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Really excited to dive in. Hi!
Hey, what's going on? Good to see you.
The last time you were on the pod, we were talking about sustainable weight loss. And this time you've taken that to another level. So can you tell us, just remind our listeners who you are, what you're about, and then break your thought process down about how you even decided to do a day or a 60-day experimentation on whole foods versus carnivore diet.
Yeah. Well, first, I'm so excited to be back. I love Cronometer and I love all the people that are part of it. So thank you for having me again. For people that don't know who I am, I'm a registered dietitian. I am performance coach. I have been doing this for about 12 years. And my approach is sustainable, long-term longevity, health. And I decided to do the complete opposite, this diet experiment. My focus is specifically around performance, weight loss, body recomposition, and just wellness and longevity, to be honest. That's sort of the things that fascinate me in terms of the way I coach my clients. We have a program and we have a company that is dedicated to providing education and helping people navigate nutrition in the world of craziness that we live in today, where we don't really know what to do. We're gathering a lot of pieces to a puzzle that we don't know how to put together because there's not really a lack of information nowadays. There's just too much of it and we just don't know how to put it together. So that insert this crazy diet experiment that I did. This experiment was born out of a YouTube comment that somebody left.
The trolls!
Yes, the trolls. This is literally what inspired this entire thing. So the backstory behind it was I did a diet review on the carnivore diet. For people that don't know what a carnivore diet is, it's an animal-based diet where you only eat strictly meats or animal products. Depends on the definition. For some people, it's very, very aggressively just meats, not even byproducts of meat. And you have zero carbohydrates, almost zero. You have zero vegetables, zero fruit, like none of that stuff. It's like very, very aggressive, just meat. So it's a very aggressive form of a ketogenic diet. And it's obviously been making headlines. And there's wild claims on social media around it. There's influencers with millions of followers, obviously, speaking about this diet and has no research to back it up. Has no research to back up its claims. So I did a video review on it and I got some people were positive comments and like, oh, this is so helpful. And others were like, you're wrong. And the thing with I feel like it's become a bit of a cult. A lot of the people within this carnivore communities are very aggressive about their approach and they will back up their claims with whatever they can kind of grab onto. So somebody left a comment and said, well, if you're just so research based or what, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said basically something along the lines of, well, if you're so smart about this stuff, have you ever even tried it to speak on it? And that actually made me think. And I was like, you know what? I haven't. But because you're saying that, I'm going to design an experiment where I'm going to be testing this diet, and I'm going to test the hypothesis that I have, that I believe a lot of the claims that people have around this magic benefits that this diet represents are a result of people just simply going from a very crappy diet to eliminating 90% of foods and just being very limited on the things they're doing, mostly whole foods, because technically you're actually just eating meat. And I think those benefits are coming as a result of that, and not because there's something inherently beneficial of just simply eating meat and cutting out vegetables. So that was a research question that I posed, and that's how everything started.
I remember following, and I don't remember the name of the documentary, but there was a man that subjected himself to eating McDonald's, I think for 30 days. And then he did all the blood work and you followed his, and I was riveted. I love when people are like, you know what? I'm going to do something and see what happens. And interestingly, like part of the reason I'm so fascinated by what you did is I did the same thing like 6.5 years ago for Cronometer. The ketogenic diet was like really getting a moment. That's like when there was like a resurgence in low carb. I remember that being true for me in high school as well. There was the Atkins diet. And then there was this resurgence of the ketogenic diet. And I was like just starting to manage our community, and a lot of people were talking about it. And I was like, you know what? I can't really get into the mindset about why this matters so much to people. And I'm like, I'm going to do the ketogenic diet. And I did for a month, and it was really interesting to meal plan for me because there was like more meat and that kind of thing. And I'm not typically a meat eater, and I did not thrive. That would be what I would say for me about the ketogenic diet. Cause I do think it's incredibly individualized. Of course, our bodies are all unique and the results are different. But I remember just like bonking at like 2 p.m. We had a couch at Cronometer. Our office was smaller then. And I was like, you guys, I have to go sleep for 10, 15 minutes. Like I have to, I'm exhausted. So when you did this, I'm just like, I'm so
it brought back memories
because it really did. But I think there's something so powerful of being like, I want to understand, let me try, as opposed to just dismissing, you know. I think that there's a beauty for sure in that.
And that's why I did it.
Yeah. You took it to a whole other level than I did. I was going off vibes, but you really ran a tight ship on this one. So I would like you, if you could, to explain exactly what you did, and then to help our listeners understand what you were trying to answer for yourself and for others when you actually designed this.
Yeah. So when the idea came up and the research question came up, which the basic question I was trying to answer is, are the benefits of a carnivore diet the result of eliminating processed foods, or there's something inherently beneficial about just eating just meat? That's what I wanted to answer. And I asked myself, well, how can I design something that can test this question or this research question? So I thought, okay, well, the first thing I would need to do is I would need to see what happens when I eat just only strictly whole foods. So the first part of the experiment was to do 30 days on a whole foods only diet. I want you to imagine it's a modified version of a Whole30. For people that don't know what Whole30 is, it's a commercial name for a very strictly whole foods diet. It's basically lean meats. It's no grains. I had some exceptions in there. Fruits and vegetables. And things like tubers, like potatoes, sweet potatoes. I ate so much sweet potatoes in that diet. So very limited, but then I made some exceptions to the rule. I did have things like 80% dark chocolate. I allowed myself to have a couple of grains, which included rice and quinoa. And then the only dairy that I was allowed to, or that I allowed myself to have, was Greek yogurt and cottage cheese. So for the most part, it's a dairy-free, sugar-free, grain-free, gluten-free diet that is strictly just whole foods. And I thought, well, I think this is a pretty good like dietary approach to test that would look at, okay, what happens when we are only doing whole foods. And then I'm going to transition from there to doing a carnivore diet. But there were some caveats to that. I was like, okay, what do we need to test so we can understand the differences between these two? So I went to ASPE's Applied Science and Performance Institute here in Tampa, where I live, which is I have some good friends in there who are researchers, and I sat with them and asked them, how would you design this experiment? These are people that have actually conducted research and published studies. So they're like, okay, this is the way that you would design it. You will probably do 30 days. You will test a lot of things prior to and after. You will probably do about a week of what we call ad libitum eating, which means eating to satisfaction, not tracking anything. And we'll go through the tracking process and what I did with Cronometer. And then I will take a 2-week period of time where we call it washout, where I went back to my normal eating patterns. My normal eating patterns is not like I eat like crap, but I do eat processed foods, probably in a 60 to 70 to 30% ratio. So I went back to that. And then after that, I started 30 days on a carnivore diet. So this whole process probably took about 3 months, since May 19th or 17th up until the very end of August, around August 23rd. I remember because it was like the day before my birthday. So that was like the duration of the process. So let's now look at what I tested. I did everything that I could. I think I spent closer to $3,000 or the equivalent of that to be able to do all the testing that I did. I did DEXA scans. I did metabolic analysis. I did blood work. I did some performance testing. I track every single thing, every day, extracting Cronometer, every single day to the T. I've never been so accurate in my life when it comes on to diet tracking. And then I also even track like appetite and some appetite assessments that I did with validated questionnaires. So, I mean, you have no idea. I have like a mountain of paperwork somewhere in there that, in fact, I can probably show you like all this stuff. It's all data from people that are able to watch this from this study. So every day I was like measuring things, tracking things. So, and then the key thing about these two diet experiments and what makes them so unique to the point that we are currently in talks of publishing this data on a journal, and is that it was a protein and calorie controlled experiment. What does that mean? It means that both diets had the same amount of calories and the same amount of protein. And that's what makes two diets comparable, which is a huge strength in diet studies. This means that I consume exactly the same calories and proteins in one diet and the other. What changed is basically the carbohydrate and fat composition. So we looked at so many different things in terms of that, but that was sort of the design of the experiment, and I was very adherent to it. And again, everything was tracked, but that's just so you can kind of get a bit of an idea of how I design everything for purposes of this.
I love how scientific you were, because I think that's the most important piece in order to make it credible. And it's amazing that you sat down with people that are experts in research to design this, because again, I think that one of the things that I struggle with so much managing our community online is just the amount of misinformation. And I'm like, people are coming to me and they're like, where do I learn about nutrition? I obviously defer to experts. You're a registered dietitian. You know, there are many people that are both educated and influencers in the space that are ideal to follow, but there's still so much misinformation about diets. And I think the only way to clear that up is with exactly what you've done, is to really nail down the scientific principles, follow something rigorously, and then look at different biomarkers really to determine success. a lot of people, I'm assuming that listen to us are quite familiar with the carnivore diet, and I myself have done the Whole30, so I've also guinea pig myself that way. But could you give us just a quick breakdown of what your typical diet looked like on both plans on any given day?
Yeah, I love that question. So for a Whole Foods, my typical diet consisted of my morning breakfast on a Whole30 was I got this into this kick of a blueberry and banana smoothie with a tablespoon of peanut butter and water or just almond milk, even though technically milk is processed. I did actually make that exception. And then I would do some form of like egg meal, eggs and egg whites with some vegetables in it. I would throw in some spinach. I would try to make it as packed vegetables as I could. So that was my typical breakfast. My lunch would most likely be something like roasted sweet potatoes, maybe some chicken thighs or chicken breast. Sometimes I would go and do some form of fish, and then a vegetable source. Think asparagus or green beans, something like that. I always try to keep it simple, or like a salad bowl. It was usually what I would do. Then for my dessert in the afternoon, because I have a big sweet tooth, which is actually one of the biggest fears I had, because I do enjoy like the occasional cookie, like the things like that. So for this, is the only sugar that I had was just coming from fruit, the dark chocolate, which was 80% dark chocolate. And then my typical treat in the afternoon was I grabbed 2 dates, put a little bit of peanut butter in them, and then just a little piece of dark chocolate, sea salt, and that was amazing. And anybody listening, try that, and then you'll thank me later. It was amazing. So that was like my treat every single day. And for dinner, I would normally do something similar to lunch. It was not really that crazy. I would do, this is where I maybe add a little bit of rice. Sometimes it was just meals where it was just like a protein. If I ate fish for lunch, I would do like a chicken for dinner or something along those lines. And I would still have like ground beef and different things like this too. So that's what a typical day on like a Whole30 would look like. One of the things that I like joked a lot around on this diet was the fact that I don't know what I'm going to do without pizza. In fact, I posted a story on like a pizza place that I love here in Tampa, and I'm like, man, this is the last time I'm going to have pizza probably for like 3 months. So I made like this like sweet potato crust pizza that I don't know how like I did it. It wasn't really the same thing, but I made it happen. So I got creative. To be honest, throughout this section, I learned to become creative in the process, and I tried so many different new recipes and ideas that really taught me that the fact that, hey man, like you can totally have like a really tasty diet when you just really make the effort and the intention to be able to make it happen. So that was the first part of it. I really felt good on it. I really liked it and enjoyed it. And the second part, which is obviously on the carnivore diet, it was a lot more aggressive. It's something I have never done. I was super scared about. My typical day looked like this. I would wake up, I would go and have breakfast. Most people on the carnivore diet sometimes they skip it because they feel so full with the amount of fat that they consume. But I didn't. I would have 4 to 5 eggs cooked in bacon grease. So I would have 2 slices of bacon with 4 to 5 eggs. And then sometimes, because I needed to have a little extra fat, I would throw in about a tablespoon of butter. I would also throw in some meat. So the night before, I would cook some like a flank steak or like a skirt steak, something fatty, and I would kind of throw it all in there. That was about a 800 to 1,000 calorie breakfast. For lunch, sometimes either I would skip it because I wasn't really as hungry, or I would do, something boring like chicken breast or not chicken breast, like chicken thighs. It needed to be a higher fat meat. And then for dinner, I would just do steak, or I got into this kick of doing this bison burgers with 1 or 2 eggs, a slice of cheese, and 2 slices of bacon. That was like my thing. The only kind of treat that I gave myself access to was pork rinds. Sometimes like to kind of enjoy something crunchy. That was the typical day on a carnivore diet. And yeah, we can talk more details about it, but that's sort of, you can get an idea of what the diets and how different both of them were, even though both of them had the same amount of protein and calories on both occasions, which was one of the hardest things to do.
I did see your Cronometer screenshots on your YouTube video, and I was like, represent! And they were nearly identical. Like, you really would have had to be very intentional about planning your days in order for those to align so well. So you used a ton of different methods of testing. You said like DEXA, some blood panels, and you even use your Whoop data. Beyond what was going on underneath the skin, can you give us a general overview of just how you felt day to day on both diets?
Yeah. So when I did the Whole30 diet, I immediately started feeling better. In fact, like a week after, I posted pictures of my body, and like you could see a change in my face, right? Like, and granted, I was coming from a period of time where I was definitely doing a little bit too much sugar. I was definitely not like having like the best of diets. So I think it was a great transition, and I immediately started to feel better. My hunger was managed. And granted, I was not going to, but for people listening, I was doing about 2,000 calories a day. So between 2,000 and 2,100, it's a small deficit for me. I'm 100, at the time I was 179 pounds when I started this diet. And that was a small deficit. So it's not something that I was starving myself, but I still wanted to create a small deficit to see and determine whether weight loss would occur on both diets. So I felt really good throughout that whole process. My cravings obviously went down, so I was not really craving as much sweets. And I realized that, hey, I can't live my life without like added sugars. Like, it definitely was possible. And when I was intentional about it, it felt really good. Now, Carnivore was a different story. The first week was a major disaster. I felt awful. Like, when I'm saying awful, I think it's a combination. I was coming off of a cruise ship the weekend before, so I think I caught something. So I was probably at something, like I was a little sick. But on top of that, really cutting down all carbs like very aggressively, and like pushing my body through like getting so much fat very, very rapidly. Some people typically slow their way into it, but I couldn't. This is part of an experiment. Mm-hmm. So I was in the bathroom quite often, and not to get too graphic, but it was like very, very, very bad in terms of like, explosive diarrhea, all these kinds of awful things. My energy was terrible. Like the brain fog, they call this like the keto flu, right? The transitional phase, and then being sick didn't really help the situation. So I think I started this on a Wednesday, and it wasn't really until Sunday night where I started to feel better and feel like sort of okay. I had to really kind of ramp up my electrolyte intake and different things like that. So that transition was much worse than I expected it to be. Now, the week after, I started to feel a little bit better. But the thing with this carnivore diet was like it was incrementally improving the way I felt week to week. And week 4 is a week that I think I haven't really felt like that in a very long time. In so many different, different senses of the word, right? First, performance. I was crushing my gym performance. Like cardiovascular speaking, like I feel like I could go forever. Like my friends that are of mine that we do cross training, CrossFit style stuff, and sometimes we were like competing against each other, and I'm like crushing them. And I was like, dude, like, is this carnivore diet? What is it doing to you? So I felt amazing, and that's the week that I thought I think I could do this forever. I think I could. I just love the feeling, and that allowed me to understand something key here, which is this is the same feeling people have that get them to say this is the best thing's ever happened to me, right? And it happens because, well, when you look at the research on keto adaptation, which is the process of your body to adjusting from using carbs as your main source of fuel to using fats as your main source of fuel, it's a process that takes time. Your body immediately starts to produce ketones within a week, but then at week 4 is when in athletes, for example, you tend to see a full transition, or when your body starts to really become effective. And that was literally textbook for me when I started feeling this is a time where I am now feeling really good. So that was sort of the end of the diet, right? Where I'm feeling all this amazing thing. So I'm not sure what would have happened if I would have kept it up. I still kept it up for another week, which was like that ad libitum period. But to be honest, like I felt in week 4, if I compare week 4 to like the overall feelings of Whole30, I felt so much better on a carnivore diet, which obviously made me understand a lot of things of what people talk about.
And were you expecting to feel that way? Did you think that there would be light at the end of the tunnel for you? Because you went into this knowing the potential effects on like maybe like your blood panels and that kind of thing. But were you surprised by how good you felt? Because you actually competed, if I'm not mistaken, in a CrossFit tournament and won. Let's talk about that for a second.
Yes. Yeah, so I forgot about that. So yeah, I was not expecting to feel the way that I did. I was expecting, well, let's backtrack to 2017. Speaking of the ketogenic diet, I did a 1-year ketogenic diet experiment. It wasn't really like this. It was just simply going on a ketogenic diet, not tracking, no nothing, just eating a bunch of fat and like, low carb. So I did it, and I remember in the first stages of that feeling pretty good and feeling really good around it. So I suspected I was going to feel good because when your body's running on ketones, for the most part, it does feel better. Like, I do think it's a cleaner source of fuel in a way of like the way that your body would, particularly, it really depends, it's context dependent on the person. But for me, I know it would have made me feel really good. Just didn't really expect it to make me feel the way it did. Particularly when I was not really consuming any type of like carbohydrates. No, not even like, I think my total carb intake average was about 7 grams a day. So, and then on top of this, like my friends asked me, hey, like we are missing one teammate. So it was a team competition. It's called the Tampa Bay Games. And they're like, you want to join? And I'm like, man, like just so you know, I'm doing this diet. So like I may just completely, for a lack of a better term, shit the bed. So just FYI. And they're like, yeah, no worries. We got you. And I did it. And it's funny because I share a story of like what I was eating that day. I was like, pushing MCT oils and I think I remember I was doing heavy cream shakes. It's the only time I had like a whey protein powder because of the fact that I needed to have a quick thing. I was munching on like what's it called? Pork
dehydrated cheese, it looked like. Oh, okay.
Dehydrated cheese, a bunch of stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, it was not an individual competition, but honestly, I felt like awesome. I like strength was not the only thing was affected in this period was my strength. I was not really as strong as I typically am with carbs, and I'm even seeing it now. But for the most part, cardiovascular speaking, I was feeling amazing. And what's more interesting is the next day after the competition, all my teammates were like, we had a group text chain. They're like, man, like I cannot feel my legs. Like I'm so sore. For me, I felt nothing. I felt like I was just so like, it felt great. And that's something that was very interesting to me because my ability to recover was enhanced. And then I had some hypotheses around this. I think to a certain extent, like inflammation, it's a little bit lower in those type of situations, or when like carbs are a little bit lower, and there's some data to support that. But that was very surprising to me. That I was not expecting. And and I just continually felt that my recovery was quicker, even though my Whoop data was not always showing that. So a lot of these different things were just very subjective and not always being shown on the data. And we'll get into results in a second, but that was something that for me was very, very interesting, that the fact that what I felt was not what the numbers were showing. And, made me question a lot of things in terms of that experience.
It's interesting you say that. First of all, I love that you're like, I might not do well, and then you crush it. So they're probably like, we're going to do the carnivore diet now too. But interesting that you say that your Whoop data was not aligned with how you were feeling, because I failed, but I tried to run every day for the month of September. I don't know. I'm like you. I'm like, I'm just going to go do something completely different than normal. And I felt so good. My run times were actually like improving. I was shaving significant times off my pace. And I was like, this is incredible. Same thing. I just felt like Superman, honestly. And then I wear a Garmin as opposed to a Whoop, but then I was looking at the stats and my HRV is just tanking. And I was like, okay, it's really weird. And I'm not sure what this is. And, maybe you have insights, but it was hard to reconcile how I was feeling and how I was performing versus like what was going on inside of me. And I think that that's a component that not everybody, unfortunately, has access to. Not everybody has a wearable. Not everybody can do blood testing. And that gives me, talking about your experience and my own, like a moment of pause and wondering, like, most people are going off vibes. And if you and I just went off that, we both would have not really seen a potential underlying issue. So I think that that's really interesting. In your experience, how much do you think we should be relying on like what wearable data is telling us in this case versus what we're feeling?
I think here's the thing. What I think the data on wearables give us, it's giving us real time information, but it's not giving us long term. What I guess that we're looking at the subjective feelings of somebody, right? Like feeling amazing when you were running and all that kind of stuff like that. What the wearable is giving you real time information of what's happening internally that you may not be feeling, but doesn't necessarily mean that there are not going to be repercussions to that in the future, and there's going to be consequences of that if you continue on that in the future. On that, I think wearable tech and wearable data like HRV and recovery markers and different things like that, they kind of give you sort of like the warning signs, like, hey, like your HRV is lower, it's actually trending lower, which HRV is a standard of sort of like your body status as far as like, two different systems, your sympathetic and your parasympathetic system. Sympathetic is a fight or flight response. Your sympathetic or parasympathetic is what we call your rest and digest. So you want to have a nice little dance between the two for you to be able to be balanced and recover adequately. When you're doing a lot of these different things, like my crazy diet or your, like insane run experiment, you may start to notice that your body's really trying to tell you something. It's like, hey, like, recovery is actually lower. Like we are actually favoring more fight or flight. Now, your body's an amazing machine. So subjectively, you felt amazing, yet your body's trying to tell you something. So here's the thing. If you would have kept on that running, maybe for another 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and you continue to see this thing tanking, now that you may start to experience symptoms. Now you start to experience maybe like unwanted weight gain because your body's just like cortisol levels are just shot, or perhaps you start to feel like energy changes or like hormonal shifting, different things like that, particularly when the right fueling is not added. And this is what happens a lot of times at higher caliber athletes, which is what we called overtraining, which is if you push yourself past a point where like your body's ability to be able to keep up with the amount of training or stimulus you put in your body through does not keep up, and it's hard to do. And that's when your adaptation starts to going up. It starts to actually climb down. And this is something I see often in many people. I work with a lot of runners who spend like years running incessantly, and now they're paying for it. So I think wearable information, just like it did for my experiment, can be very good representative data that does not need to be seen as, my numbers are like bad, but then I feel great. It's more like, okay, these are warning signs. I need to be aware of this. I need to kind of be paying attention to this more specifically, and making sure that I'm not just letting myself go based on the way that I feel. And I think that's data that we currently have access to in our times that before we didn't. And I think it's valuable because I think it makes us more aware of the things that we can or cannot do.
That's really helpful, just on a personal level. I was curious. I have one more question, and then I want to dive into some of the findings that you found. How do you think that the carnivore diet works with someone who's into endurance events? I know that you said that you felt your cardio was really, really good in this CrossFit event. Do you think that runners would get the same performance benefit?
I think I spoke about this a little bit on the video on who could benefit from this. And I think endurance athletes could see a benefit from this, or obviously context dependent. Mostly because a lot of the research on fat adapted athletes, or people that keto adapt to using fat as the main source of fuel, they sometimes they have very similar performance and sometimes even better. Now, this is a very big subject of controversy. In fact, I attended a conference where they had two of the biggest researchers on both sides, carb athletes and then the fat athletes. And they went at it, right? And I think the carb researcher won in terms of showing the data that's still superior. But I do believe that, training endurance athletes who do this very seriously, they could benefit from it. Not necessarily a carnivore is a very aggressive way because you're cutting out all forms of carbohydrates. So you're just really forcing your body to use fat as a main source of fuel. And that's what they call it training low. So it's training at a very low carb state, high fat state. So your body has no other choice but just to figure out something to do. I do think that enhances your body's ability to use fuels more effectively, but I don't necessarily think it's something beneficial long term. So what this means is let's say you are a long term runner, or you're planning to train for an Ironman, and it's next year, you could probably benefit from going through a 3 or 4 month period of a fat adaptation and train low the way that, a carnivore diet would actually get you to be like. But then again, with the plan to transition off of it to just go back into a normal carbohydrate adapted state, because I think your body becomes more efficient at using some of those fuels. Again, that's very nuanced and very sometimes not research specific, but that's the way that I would probably test that if I was an endurance athlete.
I would love to see the conference you attended where two people went head to head and supported their own diets. That sounds like my kind of entertainment to watch, because I'm trying to always understand not only, this information for our users, but also for myself. And I also like making myself a guinea pig. So that would be super fascinating. But back to what you found in your own experiment. Can we start with body composition and fat loss? So we know that you kept calories and protein nearly identical, but still saw some interesting changes. What stood out the most when it comes to body comp and fat loss between the two phases for you?
So I did DEXA scans at the following time points. I did it before I started Whole Foods, right after. And this is within periods of tracking. So when I was doing all the tracking of food in Cronometer, it was 2 days before I started. And then the day I finished Whole Foods. And then I did it again right before I started the carnivore diet and right after I finished. So they can kind of be comparable. When I started, and this was DEXA scans and metabolic assessment using a direct, a metabolic cart, that's what it's called. When I started the ketogenic or the Whole Foods diet, I weighed in at 179 pounds at 16.3% body fat and about 148 pounds of lean mass. When I finished Whole Foods, I weighed in at 172 pounds, 16.1% body fat percentage, which is a 0.2 percentage drop, not a whole lot, and about 142 pounds of lean mass. So according to this DEXA scan, I dropped about almost 7 or 6 pounds of lean mass throughout that period of time. So I was that was surprising to me, because given the fact that I was still training resistance and all that, I was not really expecting that to happen. Now I felt, though, that I felt and looked leaner. So if you look at the picture comparison, you can totally see I was much, much leaner. So I think, again, this is where we kind of take both things into consideration, where how you feel and how you look versus what the numbers tell you. And I would say that there was an improvement and change in body fat percentage. that I would say was significant. So that's what happened in the Whole30 or the Whole Foods experiment. Then I went and retested before I started Carnivore. And the reason we did the washout is because we want to try to avoid the carryover effects of one diet into another, which is actually interesting because when I did my DEXA right before the Carnivore diet, which was about 4 weeks later after I finished the Whole30, my body fat percentage was 15.8. So it was lower to start off with than what I ended up a month before. So interestingly, I continued to drop body fat, but that was my baseline pre-Carnivore. Afterwards, I went from 15.8 to 15.5. So there was a drop in body fat, but if you remember the 0.2 difference that I had on Whole Foods, now this was 0.3. Not a lot of differences between them. My weight went from 179. So interestingly, after this cruise, weight went back up. I started at 179. It was so funny that I started literally at the same weight. I was like, well, I guess the research gods want me to really be like right on this, like as accurately as possible. And I went down to 169 pounds. It was a 10-pound drop, nearly 11. So a bigger amount of weight lost. Now, what's interesting though, is like 7 or 8 pounds out of the 11 that I lost on Carnivore, I would say probably 6 were lost in the first week. So I dropped very rapidly weight because of a massive amount of what we call glycogen dumping. So I lowered my glycogen loads, like my water retention obviously lower because of the fact that I'm just, I'm flushing out all that. There's no carbs in the body that are kind of keeping that full. So that's what I attribute that to. Now, my lean mass, interestingly too, went up again to 148. So that's why I said I think it's mostly related to glycogen. When you're looking at a DEXA scan, it's what it's called a 3-compartment model. So it looks like bone, lean mass, and non-lean mass, which is essentially fat. But it doesn't necessarily differentiate between what's in the muscle. So it could be if the muscle looks smaller, and therefore most likely due to glycogen depletion, then most likely that's going to show that the muscle is smaller. So you're losing lean mass. So interestingly, I went from 148 to about 142. So same differences in changes in terms of lean mass according to DEXA scan, yet my body fat percentage, again, very, very similar changes. And when you look at my body and the changes between the both, I was just looking more flat. It's really the word that I would describe. It's still looking leaner, but then I just look flat. And if this makes sense, when you're looking at athletes who compete in stages and bodybuilding competitions, they do carb strategies to be able to look more like filled, which means like they look more like muscular, just simply by manipulating water and carbohydrate intake. So that made sense to me. But what was the full conclusion on the body composition side of things? That with protein and calories are equated, there's no difference in body composition changes, or the difference that you're going to find are going to be very, very similar or identical, regardless of the diet that you did. So I was consuming nearly 200 grams of carbs on one and 7 grams of carbs on the other. And when calories were the same and protein was maintained around the same, the percentage difference on body fat changes were nearly identical. So that reinforced a very basic principle of thermodynamics that I explained, which is when calories are equated, it doesn't matter what you do, your body's going to lose fat. If it's in a calorie deficit, it's going to gain weight. If it's on a calorie surplus, it's going to stay around the same if it's going to be on a calorie maintenance. And when we looked at my metabolic data, like the amount of calories my body estimated to be burning, I had probably a 200 calorie deficit. So it wasn't crazy, and it would explain the very small differences in that. So when I look at these numbers, they were all like, this makes perfect sense. And it explains a lot of the things. And I think the strength of the data that I collected was so unique because, well, I'm doing the collection. I'm doing the research on this stuff. I'm logging my foods, and I am like type A perfectionist. Like, my wife is just sometimes me to say I'm crazy. So I know that what I'm putting in there, it's like 98% accurate. So that's another part of it that I believe was helpful around this. So those were the body composition results.
I think that I'm not surprised at all to hear that you lost weight in the first week, because honestly, when I did the ketogenic diet, it was the same thing. I remember losing a ton of weight when I started restricting carbs, and then even how my clothes fit, because I just felt emptier, for lack of a better term, I guess. You know, like, I'm like, oh, my jeans are like quite loose. And then I lost like 7 pounds, same thing. And I think that that's what gets people really excited, because a lot of people are joining the carnivore diet because they want to have fat loss. Most people doing any diet, that's typically one of their key motivators. But why do you think that the piece about like having the same result is such an important takeaway for people that are chasing the quick fix?
Because a lot of these diets, that's what they promise. It's like, this is superior way to lose weight. This is going to help you much more. You're going to be able to lose weight more effectively when you do it this way. And the ultimate reality is that, well, so let's talk about why people typically tend to experience that. When you're not really controlling some of those things, like when I did the carnivore diet experiment, like I was so full, like I didn't want to eat like even the 2,000 calories I was supposed to eat. Right? Like I was limited to only consuming 10 items on my grocery list. So when you're so limited, even when you don't really look at tracking or anything like that, you are going to eat less. And that's what drives everything. When we're looking at like the boom of GLP-1 drug medications, what they're doing at the brain level is affecting circuits that affect reward systems, craving systems, hunger systems, all of them leading to not being driven by hunger in your day-to-day choices, which eventually leads to what? Eating less. You eat less. You consume less calories. So when people present with to you like these diet or another diet, the question that you need to ask yourself is like, why does this diet work? And it's most likely related to the fact that you're going to be eating less overall. And whether it's because it's going to keep you fuller, or because you're going to be more restricted, or because you're going to be so miserable that you're like, okay, like this is the only thing that I can eat. So ultimately, if you want to lose weight, you can do it by eating what you prefer. I think a whole foods approach is more realistic and more sustainable, and you can do it if you really learn how to do it adequately.
Yeah, I think sustainability is seldom looked at when people start a diet, if I'm being honest. And that's what I'm always asking, even like my friend circle, when they're talking about doing any kind of extreme. I do understand that there's freedom in restriction. And when I say that, I mean like you're losing the decision-making conundrums, like on a carnivore diet, it's simply easier, I think, to be like, I'm going to eliminate this food group, or I'm only going to eat this food group. And that there's freedom in that, because you don't have analysis paralysis about like what to make for dinner and those kinds of things. So I get that it's easy. You don't necessarily need to like track. Obviously you do track and do religiously, but it feels like there's some piece that makes it easier. But then I always question, what does that look like long term? Like, are you going to be making the same decisions forever? And
so let me share something interesting about this that I don't think I've actually shared publicly yet. Today, at the time of this recording, which is now 2 months after I finished this carnivore experiment, so I finished at 169 pounds. I'm currently weighing at 183. So I gained all the way back and more. And honestly, and this is something that is like, more in the depths of my kind of mindset around this, and it's something that I'm now kind of reflecting backwards on, is I have kind of like, turned loose on my decision making around food. And what I mean by that is like, I haven't been great about the decisions that I'm making around food. I have been again gravitating more aggressively and heavier towards sugar. I've been gravitating more towards overeating and feeling more like that uncomfortable fullness sometimes that, I experience. And to be honest, it's not really the way I was feeling before I did all of these. So I think there is something about something inherent to restriction that creates a long-term change in us that it's not healthy, to be honest. And everybody's different. But I think it's because of the fact that I spent 3 months of this year being so aggressively tracking every single little detail. And at the same time, it wasn't really so much tracking, but it was now, like the restrictions that I created and imposed in both diets, that I just got burned out. And because of that, I went in the complete extreme. With the awareness that I have as a registered dietitian, I teach about this stuff every single day, yet I have now become a victim of it. And it's not until now that I'm now understanding, like, okay, I need to do something, because I have been afraid to step on the scale, to be honest. And that's something that's never happened to me before, because I know what's happening in the kitchen. I know what's happening on what I'm putting on my plate and the things that I'm currently doing. So this is something that I haven't fully talked about up until now, but now that I have a platform to be able to do it, this is the after effects of doing something like this. And for the longest amount of time, I've kept my weight very, very normal by following a sustainable approach. And now these two diets come into place, and like 2 months later, not only did I gain 10 pounds back, but then another 5 on top of it. That's something that is important to consider.
That honestly echoes my own experiences. I've tried every diet under the sun simply to lose weight. I often say I've lost more than 100 pounds in my lifetime, but I think it's just because like the same 10 pounds. And this is like the last 2 years, I've really maintained my weight. And that's been a huge obstacle for me my whole adult life. And I think it's because I went through massive periods of restriction, not necessarily in the foods that I was eating, but in the volume. I was limiting myself to like 1,300, 1,400 calories. For contrast, now I eat like well over 2,000, usually around like 2,300 every day. I'm quite active. So there is that. But after periods of restriction, I always ended up binging. Like I would have like numerous 5,000 calorie days, and it would be so hard to like rein it back. And now for me, like I also have a sweet tooth. I actually joke that I have sweet teeth because every single tooth is a sweet tooth. But I really let myself have the foods that I want when I want them, in moderation, which I know sounds so boring. People like moderation, but it's true. Like I love mini eggs. So I'll have mini eggs every once in a while, and I don't beat myself up about it. And I think that's been the key for me, is to just not restrict to the same level. So it's interesting that someone with your education and expertise, and especially someone that's like coaching, like we're all human, you're going through the same thing. So my heart goes out to you. That's not an easy thing. And I think, being worried about getting on the scale, that's a very familiar fear of mine before. Because I'd be like, I had 5,000 calories for 3 days. That's going to have an effect. Not a huge one over, the span of time, but definitely sent my system for a shock. So that's interesting. I'd love to do a follow-up later to see how this plays out for you.
I'm hoping that it doesn't continue to go in the wrong direction.
If anyone can get the ship back on course, it's you. So we know there was no like startling difference between the fat loss, not really in any metabolic changes as well. Let's talk about what was going on with your lab results. Was there any huge red flags with the carnivore diet or the Whole30? Let's talk about what your doctor found.
Yeah. So when I did blood work testing before the diet started. After Whole Foods, I didn't do right before carnivore. I felt like it was just not really a need for it. And then I did after the carnivore diet. So before, just for transparency purposes, I already had my lipid values were a little bit elevated. So I have high cholesterol and high LDL, or which is like what they call the bad cholesterol. My family has it. My mom has it too. So I think there's a part of it associated with a genetic component, because my numbers have always kind of been on the higher side. They have not been above the borderline numbers, but again, it was coming from a place where my diet still hasn't been great. So made sense. When I did the whole foods, I was expecting those numbers to improve. They didn't. They just stayed around the same, literally the same. So that was kind of surprising to me. I didn't really see any kind of like changes. So my cholesterol went from like 252 to 250. My LDL like kind of lower by 3 points. So it wasn't really a ton. Now my doctor said a lot of times I got 30 days. It's just not enough time to be able to see the long-term benefits. If you were to continue on this for 3 months, most likely you would have seen like some better numbers. I did also hormone testing, so I was really curious as to what happened to my testosterone levels and all the things around that. And everything else on the side of my labs, like before and after Whole Foods, looked pretty much the same. The one thing that was interesting is my total testosterone remained the same. No really changes, and it was a pretty good number. I think it was like around in the high 700s. But what's interesting is when we're looking at hormone values, particularly in men, we look at total testosterone, but also we're looking at free testosterone and something called like your SHEB, which is your sex hormone binding globulin. Think about that as like the sort of protein that is attaching or grabbing all your testosterone that is bound to it. And when it's bound to it, it's like it's not free, so your body cannot use it. So it needs to release it. So what was interesting is like my sex hormone binding globulin went up, which means like my free testosterone, or like the amount of testosterone I carry in my body, I was actually hanging on more to it. And I don't know much about what that means yet, but that was kind of interesting, because even though my total remained the same, the amount of free available testosterone to use was lower, while like the stuff that was bound was higher. So that's something interesting that happened then. Now we move on to the carnivore diet experiment, which is what got me a call from my doctor. I was seeing a concierge medicine practitioner here in Tampa. His name is Rishi Seth, and he's an incredible dude. And he sat down with me. He called me, actually. He's like, "Hey, I just got your labs back. We need to talk." I'm like, "What's going on?" I was like, "These numbers do not look good." And it scared me. This is literally like the 4th week where I'm feeling amazing. I'm feeling awesome. And then like he calls me. It's like, and to be honest, I was expecting some of those numbers to go up. I knew they were going to go up. I just didn't know the magnitude by which they would go up in a very short period of time, because 30 days is not that long. My cholesterol levels shot up from 250 to, I think it was around 420 or something like that. So like they almost doubled. My LDL, bad cholesterol, went from, I think in the 170s or so, it went up to 350 plus. Like I think in the markers, like it just showed like a plus, which means like, that's as far as they typically measure it. So that means obviously what's outside even of the range. What was interesting too is my liver values. He said, this looks like the blood panel of either an alcoholic or somebody that has non-alcoholic liver fatty liver disease, because all my ALT, AST levels, like all like the liver enzymes were like super high. My bilirubin was super high. So a lot of different things were kind of concerning. You look at a lot of functional doctors who really practice low-carb diets, they say that's kind of normal and that normalizes. I didn't want to sit around and wait to see what would happen. So liver values were off. My cholesterol was just through the roof. So yeah, it looked like pretty scary. And then on top of this, like my ApoB, which is, it's a marker of cardiovascular disease risk, was already high to begin with, and it doubled. So this is the kind of numbers where like they look at them, it's like, And my doctor sat down with me and said, like, if I'm looking at this and I didn't really know that you were like 37, super active, super in good shape, low body fat, like I would literally put you on a statin like right now. If I didn't know, obviously, all the things that you got going on, all the diet that you did. But I'm going to tell you, this diet is not something that I will play around with like in the long term. And this is definitely not something worth like, doing for you. So in that moment, like my excitement about potentially continuing this, and because I was feeling amazing, just disappeared. So for me, it was not worth the risk. Why? Number one, because there's no research to really look at the long-term effects of a carnivore diet. If there was something that says, oh yeah, your numbers eventually are going to kind of stay down, or like there's nothing, no. But what a lot of the research shows, that higher levels of this stuff, it's correlated and has a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. So I don't want to have an arterial blockage because I was doing a diet as an experiment. So that's the moment that I did my extra week of ad libitum eating and then call it a day. And now I'm in the process, which I'm probably not doing a great job at because of what I just told you, what's been happening lately, of now reversing that and kind of getting my numbers down. And my doctor said, we're going to give you 6 months. And if in 6 months you come in here and those numbers have no improvement or no levels, you have to be seriously considering some form of like, pharmacotherapy to get those numbers down. And I was like, there's no way I'm doing that. So that's where I'm at. So that's kind of like the downside of these things, that for me, I'm like, yeah, now this makes sense. And people that will go and look at that and say like, oh, this is normal. Like, like this, like markers of cholesterol that were kind of established by doctors, like they're outdated, and whatever you want to say, I'm going to look at the research. I'm going to look at the data. I'm going to look at the stuff that's happening with people that have like these higher levels. And again, I don't want to take any risks. So that was very eye-opening. I knew where the levels were going to go up. I just didn't know the magnitude by which they would.
What's wild to me is what your blood panels are telling you and what you're feeling. Like the disconnect there is wild to me. The other thing that I find quite concerning is, especially in the United States, I'm Canadian, but in the United States, I can't imagine it would be affordable for most people to get this level of testing done. I know that you spend about $3,000 on this experiment between, different testing and then the groceries themselves. Most people that are doing these diets that they've heard about on social media, that they're feeling results, they're seeing the scale go down, they feel great. They're probably not even thinking that they should get tested for anything. And so when I heard through your YouTube synopsis on this, I was worried for a lot of people, I think, because I'm like, what average person is getting testing done before they start a diet? And 30 days into one, I would hazard a guess it'd be very small. So for me, that was definitely a little bit alarming, and kind of wanted me to encourage people to go actually get testing done on these biomarkers, because it doesn't sound like the feelings and the underlying issue are supporting each other. So that's
and to be honest, this is why, for example, when I'm working with our coaching programs, like I started to order labs for the people that we work with. Not even going, I used to be telling them, go to your doctor, get these labs. But ultimately, even in the United States, in here, that's just so difficult, because they'll order some things, but they will not look at everything. All the stuff I had to pay out of pocket. And a lot of times, like, doctors' offices will not look at a lot of these different things. So now, me as a registered dietitian and coaching people, like the first 2 weeks, I'm having people go to a lab to go get their blood drawn. And we actually look at 50, 60 plus markers so we can understand what's happening. And if we're not really looking at some of this stuff, then this becomes a lot more difficult for us to be able to manage. We can't change what we can't see. And this is why I believe so much in the tracking process and the awareness that it gives us, because then I have like that hard data to tell us like, okay, this is what I ate. This is what I did this. Right. What's interesting and what I loved about being able to use, I was talking to my co-researcher on this, which is, we look at some studies that are looking at diet, like, diet experiments, the way that I did it in case studies like this. And they were showing, like, for example, the breakdown of like saturated fats and stuff like that. And he asked me, hey, do you think we can get this information? I was like, not sure. And lo and behold, I went to my Cronometer data and I look at the reports, and we were able to kind of split up everything by polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, saturated fats, omega-3s and omega-6s, a lot of the nutrient, stuff. And that gives me enough information for me to be able to tell, like, okay, with this labs and this different information, this is exactly what happens. This is exactly what I do with my clients and why I actually have them use that. And I can actually look at that information. So it's very valuable because then we know exactly what is it that we need to do. So to your point, yes, you need to get tested. You need to go and look at this information because it's valuable. And sometimes you may not know what's been happening, even though you're feeling incredibly well. And that's a part of that.
I love that you're encouraging people to actually go and get that done, because I think I'm relatively healthy, but I honestly could benefit from getting my blood panel retested too. So I think that I remember I really advocated. I was in my mid-20s and I really advocated with my own physician to get a blood panel drawn, and she's like, "You're healthy, you're fine." And then I was like, I don't necessarily feel like that's sufficient for me. I'm a curious person. So then I went to a physician that ultimately did do that, and she found that I had low good cholesterol. And so she was like, you should make these dietary changes. And I'm like, what's interesting is, had I waited for 10 years to make a deliberate change, what would have been the ramifications? Like we have no crystal ball. We can't know, but I have to believe that correcting those earlier will definitely support longevity. So it's awesome that you're getting people to do that. One of the other things I'm most curious about in this experiment that has nothing to do with biomarkers really is just what it was like to go to social functions and that kind of thing following these diets.
One was easier than the other, and you can probably guess which one was easier than the other. But yeah, Whole Foods was not really that difficult. The cool thing about the kind of world that we live in today is the fact that there are so many different options now. So eating out was not a problem. It was easier to be able to go to a place that sells like bowls and then like kind of make my own Whole Foods type of thing. So it wasn't really too difficult. It was difficult on the alcohol front because I eliminated alcohol on both diets, and I enjoy the occasional drink. So that was a big part of it. In the carnivore, it was much more difficult. Now, it depends on where you go. But for the most part, and this is the part of it that we talk about sustainability, unless you're going to a steakhouse or like a place like that where like meat is the main component of their menu, most places you're going to have a hard time picking things that are going to kind of support some of those goals. It's not impossible, and I did it. But ultimately, it's very difficult. For example, I went to a birthday. I mean, I'm a dad, so I have a 2.5-year-old. I went to a birthday party of a 1-year-old. And, the only thing that was served was just like kiddie foods and hot dogs and cake and just finger foods. Nothing what was served in there I could have had. So I spent an entire afternoon literally just like holding myself from eating anything, not even like anything drinkable. The only thing they had in there was like bottled water, because like, these are alcohol or like diet sodas and different things like that, which I also eliminated. So that was much more difficult. So I'm thinking for people who want to embark on this and they have social lives and they have kids and they have kids sports and they have to do this and that, it's so hard. And I think this is the part of it where a lot of times, like, if people don't have like the capacity that I did, or the disposition to do it, and mostly mine was because I was doing this experiment and I wanted to finish it and do it well, you're going to falter. You're going to make choices, and then you're going to go into this, like, maybe binging episode and start it again on Monday. And like this is definitely not a good place to be on. So it was not easy. Neither of them was easy. So that's why I don't necessarily even believe on like as restrictive as a Whole30 diet. I believe like 80% of what that looks like, it's great. And then allowing yourself the 20% to just be a little bit more liberal. But for carnivore, unless you're just living in a different type of environment where like it's just easier for me to be ever present, then for me at least, it wasn't really something that I wanted to do long term.
I have to play devil's advocate. Do you think that there are any benefits to the carnivore diet? I know that you already were predisposed to having higher cholesterol. Do you think that if somebody was doing it that didn't have high cholesterol, obviously in your study, we have no way of knowing that for sure, but do you think that there is any case where the carnivore diet could be beneficial or has an edge?
Yeah, I think it's a great elimination diet. So elimination diets are the ones that just remove so many different things so we can identify what could be causing problems. People that have gut health issues, they tend to see major relief when they go into these like type of extreme diets, but it happens via elimination. A lot of times it's not that vegetables were bad for you. It was just that certain vegetables were not great for you. It's not the fact that gluten was the problem. It's maybe the fact that certain things or certain gluten products were the problem. So I think carnivore diet presents itself as a more easier way because you have direction and there's so many resources around it where you can implement this elimination diet like cut dry, and then you can identify at that point, well, you find relief, but then slowly you can start reintroducing certain things into your diet to figure it out what would work best. So I think that's the group of people that I would recommend that. In the carnivore communities, you're going to find a massive population of people with autoimmune conditions. Autoimmune conditions, for people don't know, it's just any type of chronic diseases or chronic conditions where your body attacks itself. And in some occasions, we're talking about Hashimoto's, we're talking about certain gut conditions, arthritis, like different things like this. So you see a lot of people like talking about how carnivore diet changed their lives. Because the way I felt also on post my competition, where it was it's a long competition, I am typically beat the next day. There's a part of me that feels that even though all these numbers are crazy, it can actually support inflammation support. And that could probably explain why some people that have rheumatoid arthritis and different things like that find relief, because perhaps there's a benefit to that. But again, it could be just simply really the fact that they were just eliminating certain foods that were just problematic. And for some people, it's just easier for them to just stick to the 10 foods that they always eat and to be able to maintain it. So I think so that's the thing about me. You're never going to hear me talk like ill about a diet unless because it may work for some people. I think it can work for certain type of situations. We talked about endurance athletes and things like that. It doesn't always need to be a carnivore diet or animal-based diet. It could essentially be something more like a ketogenic diet. But for the most part, there is application for some people. But I don't necessarily think it needs to be done long-term, but just more of as an experiment to figure out exactly what kind of changes you experience as a result of that. So I still would recommend it, but in very guided, first off, coached and guided occasions or cases where you know exactly why you're doing it, what the purpose is, and you understand exactly what is that you're testing as a result of that.
So now, going forward, looking at everything through the lens that you have now, and by that I mean that you've not only regained the weight that you've lost on both diets, but that you've gained additional weight. In your mind, what is the ideal diet? What does that look like for you?
I think it's one where first it's intentional. When I mean about intentional, I've been talking about intentionality so much, is it's a diet where you're eating with a purpose, right? Okay, why am I eating this way? And ultimately it's connected to the goal, but making that the goal being to live long, to live healthy is the main thing beyond just the aesthetics. That's the way I think about things now. The second piece beyond just being intentional is being something that is realistic for your lifestyle. So the best diet is the one that in the environment that you surround yourself with is realistic within you. And with that, I feel the best diet is the one that you can control through calorie and macronutrient awareness, and to use that as a tool to help you really gauge what changes in your diet would actually mean to you. And what I mean by this is I do still believe that tracking calories and macros can give you, because I'm just very numbers driven, and gives you the awareness to figure out exactly where you're at in terms of like your current dietary status. And if I was just to kind of piece this into like, okay, what is a specific diet that you should follow? I call it the 80-20. 80% foods that are going to be whole or that are going to be minimally processed. 20% everything else can be processed, ultra processed. I think that's a good breakdown, because ultimately you are going to have ultra processed foods, whether you like it or not, in different types of occasions. It's going to be impossible to completely avoid them. But I'm now making the case for not speaking of the fact that you can just simply lose weight eating ultra processed foods, because now we're seeing a lot more data, looking at like the effects on the brain that you have when you consume a diet that is heavily ultra processed foods. There's now some research showing that, some that are looking at bone data and finding microplastic residue in like bone in people. So there's an impact of the type of foods that we're consuming. So I'm still going to be more gravitating towards whole foods mainly. And this is why I call it the 80-20 diet, where 20% can be still all the things that make a diet human and realistic, and that allows you to sustain it, because it's the way that I have been eating for the past, I went on the last time I was on a fat loss diet, it was in 2018, and I got shredded, so shredded. And I was able to maintain, for the most part, that physique. I was not as lean as I have been, but I have been able to maintain that for 6-7 years, right? Without really working super hard on it, tracking here and there, bringing it back some seasons and completely letting it go other seasons. And I feel like that's just the most sustainable way to be able to approach things, right? It's a diet that is higher in protein, is moderate in carbohydrates, is typically lower in fat, because fat tends to be more dense in terms of caloric value, right? And it's a diet that still allows fun foods, the things that, the cookie, the pastry, the chips, the kind of things like that, but it's not really the center point of everything you consume. And when you learn to master that, I feel like that's just the most sustainable diet of them all.
Big ups to all of that, because that's where I live right now. 80% whole foods, 20% mini eggs.
Mini eggs, I love that.
But flexibility, I think is key. So what is next for you? Do you have any other experiments on your radar, or are you just going to give your body a well-deserved break?
So after I did this, a lot of my shower thoughts, which is really where I call it my think tank, or my shower thinking place, that's where a lot of my ideas come from. I was like, it would be cool to really start doing this 30-day experiments on so many different things, like meditation and eating this thing, eating that thing. I've kind of since changed my views a little bit on it, because it just requires a lot of commitment, certain things. And at the same time, I'm just learning that these 30-day experiments really kind of burn you out in certain things. Now, mine, granted, was a lot of variables that I needed to control. So I still think that there's like some really cool things about incorporating challenges like that, because of the fact that people like something that gets them outside of their comfort zone. So in the future, I see myself doing these like 30-day experiments, maybe not as aggressive as what I just did, until the next big diet comes in, and then I'm just going to have to do it. But for the most part is that. And I think for now, I'm just really trying to kind of get my labs back in order, trying to get into a place where my weight just finds its natural balance and it feels good. And yeah, that's kind of what's coming up next as far as like my own personal journey. So
I interviewed a bunch of Whoop and Cronometer users, and one of them, Duncan, very biohacky man, very interesting conversation. He found that his sleep scores were higher when he had turmeric every single day. So maybe that's an easy one that you could try if you wanted to not really do too much beyond just having a turmeric capsule. So fun little ones like that. I'd like the thought of exploring meditation.
Yeah, those are going to be the easier ones to do, that I feel like it's either trying like an ingredient or just one hack to do daily or something different. But I think that to me, like my approach to coaching is always like holistic. So I'm always interested on the things that create change, from what you eat to the way you think, to the acts that you do, to the habits, to the actions and different things like that. So it's like what brings you the biggest return on the investment of time towards those activities. And I think that's where we'll find that and certain improvements around that. So I think there's always really good value on experimenting with a lot of those different things when you have a purpose for it, and not necessarily something for a quick fix around something, which I think is key and it's important.
I agree. So to wrap this up, where can people follow your work? I think everyone should follow you. Very insightful, very actionable items, beautiful speaker. Or where can people find a full breakdown of your results? Because I'm sure we're going to have some listeners that want to really dive in.
So you can find, I posted a lot of this data on my YouTube. Now, a quick caveat around this, because I was just notified about this just recently. Those videos may have to be put on unlisted for a while we wait for the potential publication on this. So just so you're aware, what we're working on right now is we're working on publishing this as a case study, that it's like a full-blown like journal paper. And to get what we call IRB approval, or which is like, a national research board or committee or whatever, because it's a human subject, in this case it's done in retrospective sense. Sometimes I may just need to eliminate a lot of like my own publications around this. So you can now check it out on YouTube. If you for some reason can't find it, you will find it soon. So I'm still going to link, I'm going to send you the links to the video, because the only difference is that it will just become available later on. We don't know yet if I'm going to have to take them down. But in the meantime, though, you can reach out to me and can tell you all about it. We have a blog that will probably have this all laid out and written as well soon. But the best places you can find me are going to be my Instagram account at Andres Ayesta, which is my first and last name. My YouTube account, same, Andres Ayesta. And also, if you guys want to check out our website, so this is where we do a lot of our coaching. We have a really amazing project coming up for a membership that is going to have a lot of my knowledge and a lot of stuff like that. We're going to like really put it in there in a school community. So you can find all those details in planusnutrition.com, which is our website, where you're going to be able to get just the insights into everything that we got coming up, and all the news and things that, you can be a part of. So, come and hang out and join the fun. And again, like I'm very accessible, so I manage my own social media, so you can reach out to me and I'm going to be the one responding. And come say hi.
Amazing. For those of you that are listening and you want more information, all of the social handles that Andres just mentioned, we will put in the show notes so people can find you. But it was a pleasure last time, and certainly a pleasure this time. And we'll have to do a follow-up episode, I think, when maybe in 6 months, we'll see where you've landed.
Absolutely. Thank you for
so
having me,
much
Eliisa.
for being here. Really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
That wraps up today's episode of Discovering Nutrition. A huge thanks to Andres for joining us and for walking us through his experiment so honestly. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss future episodes. And if you want to explore your own nutrition with more clarity and confidence, you can download Cronometer to track your food, nutrients, and trends over time. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.